Hello folks, so today I'm going to jump right in since it turns out the Odyssey, a lot to talk about. I highly recommend if you have not already watched it. I did upload a Crash Course Odyssey video up to Moodle. I think it's up there in a couple places. I highly recommend watching it. It'll give you like a little bit more detail, a little bit more nuance than I'm going to give you in this rundown. So, the TLDR of the Odyssey, right? It's the story of Odysseus and his men trying to get home after a 10-year-long Trojan War. That's what the Iliad's about. The Odyssey starts with them trying to get home. Journey probably should have taken a few weeks, but because Odysseus pissed off some gods and they keep running into different diversions and disasters, it ends up taking 10 years overall. In Book X, the text that we read for this week, they end up on Cersei's island in the middle of this long journey. And Cersei transforms Odysseus' men into swine after they come into her house and eat her food. She poisons them, waves her wand. After Odysseus convinces Cersei to transform his men back into men, younger, more attractive men, I'd like to note, the text specifies, Odysseus pretty much shacks up with Cersei for a year, and he and his men hang out with her on their island. Then, when he decides he wants to leave, a year later, and get back home to his wife, she says that he has to go to the Underworld to talk to Tiresias, who's a seer, who's dead, who will tell him how he actually will get home and how that's going to go. So Tiresias tells him that he's going to have even more trouble getting home, and when he finally does, he's going to have to fight a bunch of suitors who are trying to kill his son and force his wife to remarry. So despite having all of the forewarning about this, Odysseus still, that's what happens in the rest of the text, and then he is unable to settle in peacefully once he does get home, 10 years later, because, he walked in and killed all of these dudes who were hanging out in his house. And it seems like it's gonna just keep going on in this, violent cycle until Athena comes in and fixes everything, because she's his favorite, or he's her favorite. So, the Odyssey is, by far, the oldest text we're working with this semester. It was composed around 800 BCE, so that's almost 2,000 years prior to some of the medieval texts that we've been working with. And it was written down about 200 years after that. Trojan War was a real historic war that happened around 1200 BCE, but Homer's writing 400 years after the war is in the past, right? So this is not a historical document by any means, as you might imagine from the magic and the transforming people into pigs and stuff. So, the text has gone through many translations and transformations, but the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer have been and continue to be hugely influential in the European Middle Ages, where a lot of the texts that we've already read have come out of. Virgil's account, the Aeneid of the Trojan War, was actually more influential because it relied less on the gods. The Greek gods made the Christians uncomfortable, basically. But it features many of the same characters, themes, plots, kind of retelling the story in much the same way that romances retell these stories, right? It focuses on Aeneas instead of Odysseus, but has a huge influence on many European narratives, especially narratives of nation and justifying sovereign power. So, and that includes the Arthurian tradition in England. Many rural rulers in medieval Europe try to trace their origin of their nations back to Troy, including the Romans, who claim that Rome was founded by Aeneas, and Arthur is supposed to be descended from Brute, who was a soldier of Aeneas. So this is part of what I want to do my dissertation on, so I'm gonna shut up about it, but that is definitely a common theme in the Middle Ages, is tracing and claiming real-world power through claimed connections with so-called historical epics and romances. So, To quote the Oxford bibliographies on the Trojan War in the Middle Ages, quote, "The story of Troy's fall and the romantic subplots involved by medieval writers functioned as moral exempla from which readers could learn political, military, and personal values. The narratives and themes that constitute the Trojan legend play a critical role in the development of medieval historiography and literature, though the boundaries between these genres were often blurred." So, this text in the Middle Ages and even beyond the Middle Ages kind of like stands as a model for like what you should do if you want to be like a well-educated, noble, honorable member of society, especially like a man of war, right? So, as our supplementary text for this week points out, the Crash Course video, this text and its titular character, the Odyssey and Odysseus, he's called Ulysses in some works. Don't let that trip you up. It's the same guy. Deeply misogynistic, right? In acting as an example for future texts, the patriarchal values in this text have been maintained and perpetuated for millennia. So we still have this misogynistic problem of like inequality in how men's and women's sexual promiscuity is evaluated even today, right? So misogyny is a hell of a drug. That's what I'll say about that, I guess. But despite the problematic portrayal of women in the text, not just in book 10, it's throughout the book, Cersei, in this text that we read, displays a great deal of power in our reading. We first see her weaving before a great imperishable web, such as the handiwork of goddesses, finely woven and beautiful, glorious. Cersei is not some just old ugly hag in the forest. She's a nymph or a goddess with power over the world and over men's fate, running her own household on this island. And like doing what she wants with her magic powers, with her tame pet lions and pet wolves. Like, she's doing what she wants. It's also worth noting, weaving is a really common metaphor for and allusion to the fates in classic and medieval literature. Just interesting that Cersei kind of, at the end of this passage, sends Odysseus on to, like, find out more about his fate and, like, changes his path, because he was just going to go home, right? So as we've talked about before in this class, like with the weaving, right, many of the things that are associated with witches for us today became so, or have become so, because of their association with women's work and their power both within and outside of their homes. Cersei transforms the men who come into her home through potions snuck into their food. As you buy your Halloween decorations of like cauldrons and stuff this fall, think about the power of making, offering, and accepting food. Especially from strangers or to strangers. There is an important notion when we're talking about the Odyssey of the idea of hospitality or xenia. It's hugely important in this text and in a lot of Greek texts. Basically, it's the idea that hosts have to be helpful to travelers who call on them in their homes and feed and protect them, and in turn, the guests must be respectful and offer to protect their hosts if they need it, and offer to return the favor, if there's ever any. So, as we read this week, and as we get into Madeline Miller's Cersei over the next couple weeks, we're gonna see an explanation for why Cersei, a woman, a witch, a goddess, running a household full of women alone on this island, is obligated to feed the men who come to her door, and like why she might then break those rules of hospitality and transform her guests into pigs after they eat her food. So, this week we're reading the source material, or I guess last week and this week you're reading the source material, and then as we get into Cersei, you're going to have a more modern, from her perspective, take on the situation, which should be fun. So, hope you enjoyed this reading. I really liked Cersei. I do want to give y'all a heads up, and I will remind you of this. It's also posted on all of the places. There is a trigger warning that I wanted to give at the end of chapter 14 in Cersei. There's a pretty graphic description of a rape scene. It's a couple pages long. Skip it if you need to. That's fine. No explanation required. Alright, take care of yourselves. Be safe. Have a good week. Alright, bye y'all.